Welcome to the Halloween edition of Drugs, Crime, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas. Good evening. I'm your host, Buford Terrell. With me, my associate, Clay Jones. How are you tonight? Good evening. As you can see behind me, we have our advisor and role model, Mr. George Washington, noted for being an early and prominent hemp farmer, as well as being the first president of the United States. We might add that in George's time, while the Eastern Seaboard was still British colonies, British law required virtually all farmers to raise hemp because the British Navy used hemp for both rope and sailcloth for their Navy. So hemp is part of a firm, fine, old tradition in this country, unfortunately a bit neglected of late. Well, there has been a lot going on the past couple of weeks, Clayton.
A lot of legal stuff on the West Coast. Michigan is also starting to have the same problem as the West Coast.
Well, I wanted to bring up something a little closer to home and a little maybe less serious. So I got this story out of Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. And it seems like teenagers in Albuquerque have found a new way to consume their favorite drug.
Gummy bears.
They take gummy bear candies, soak them in vodka, and then eat the bears. It seems that the bears pick up a substantial amount of the vodka. When they're eating them, it's still sweet, fruity candy, but a small handful apparently gets the kids totally looped.
Wow.
So that's just another place where sometimes kids have more imagination than parents or governments either.
Isn't that the drug that's not on a schedule? Alcohol?
Well, yeah, alcohol and tobacco, according to the Supreme Court, were intentionally omitted from the regulatory laws when Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act that created the FDA and the Controlled Substances Act. So while they meet the statutory definition for drugs and they're not mentioned, the court has said that Congress intentionally decided not to regulate them the way it did other drugs. So they have been completely outside of our normal legal structure.
The two most harmful drugs that are almost given away.
Well, we can add to that by bringing up Amy Winehouse, the British singer.
Yes.
She was found dead in her home, a month or so ago. The report of the inquest came in today. Amy's most famous song was probably Rehab, and she's been noted for her misadventures with mainly stimulants. But the inquest found that she did die of a drug overdose. The drug that killed her was alcohol. The inquest found that at the time of the death, her blood alcohol level was 0.4%, and that's 5 times the legal limit for driving while intoxicated.
I think they said that in order to get that level, she would have had to drink like 16 shots.
Probably more than that.
It was over a certain length.
Yeah. Now, in this country, we have quite a few acute alcohol toxic deaths every year. Mm-hmm. And one of the more common versions of them happens on 21st birthday celebrations, where in large parts of the country, the custom has grown up that the young person who reaches the legal drinking age downs 21 shots in celebration. And that, luckily, most of them either pass out or get sick before they reach that level, but it does result in a fairly large number of deaths each year.
You know, it's funny. Alcohol kills so many. Unregulated, unscheduled. Regulated as far as a
let's
schedule.
not say unregulated, but it's not a schedule-controlled substance.
It's not a scheduled controlled drugs. But it kills how many thousands of people every year?
I think the estimate's around 100,000, something between 15 and 20,000 in alcohol-related car deaths. Yeah.
And marijuana has never killed a soul.
Okay.
It's just, you wonder where they get their common sense.
Okay.
And remember, this is your program. We're here to answer your questions. And if you have a question, you can always pick up the phone and give us a call.
Yeah, we'll have the number up on the screen in a moment. If you're watching streaming video or on YouTube, you can contact us at the email address. I'll answer you pretty directly, and we may use your question or comment on the next show. And speaking of the next show, or at least the next show but one, we will be moving our broadcast time starting on the 21st of November. We will be moving from Wednesday to Monday. So on Monday, November the 21st, you can catch us here on this station at 8 p.m. So remember, starting on November the 21st, we're moving from Wednesday to Monday and from 8:30 to 8. So I hope you can follow us and don't get lost with the changing road. When we were talking about teenagers and young people, there's a story that came out today that I want to mention mainly because it works like some of the things we talk about. There was a study that was actually, the study was released yesterday, but it hit the news media today. This was a large study nationwide of thousands of teenagers. And the study showed that teenagers, or teenage boys, who drank at least one non-dietetic soft drink a day were more likely to carry a weapon or more likely to be involved in violent behavior than were kids who drank less than one non-dietetic soda a day. Now, that's probably an interesting study. It's probably got a lot that can be done with it. But I heard news reports today from 3 different sources, all 3 of which turned correlation into causation. In other words, all the study said was the same boys drink lots of sugar-sweetened sodas and carry guns. In every one of these news reports of that story, they turned it around to say that boys who drink sweetened sodas were more likely to carry guns. In other words, they were trying to say that, oops, drinking all those Pepsis or Cokes are going to make you a violent
person.
Yeah. And, you know, we've been fighting that same sort of misperception with marijuana for 70 years now, where studies show that, to some extent, teenagers that have mental problems also use marijuana sometimes. Now, who knows what's caused either one of those things? All we know is that they happen. Yet every time we hear someone talk about it, it comes out where they're saying marijuana causes mental problems.
Yes.
And, you know, we need to be careful. We have problems because as people, our brains have evolved to tell stories and listen to stories. We always want to tell it as a narrative, that A did this and that caused B to happen and that caused C to happen.
You know, we've got so many children in school today on ADD.
Yeah.
And they're taking their Ritalin and everything else.
Yeah.
The Ritalin is, I suppose makes a person have more dopamine. Because they say that's the cause of ADD, is basically...
I wouldn't say they have more dopamine, but let's say that all of the amphetamine-like stimulants, which includes Ritalin, do have direct effects on the dopamine circuits in the brain.
They're saying that now children that have ADD, ADHD, it's because of their upbringing, and that they're not getting the stimulation as a young child, and they have to give them the drugs in order to build their...
you know, those are not contradictory. One of the unusual things about human beings is that human beings are born with their brains not fully developed at all.
Right.
And especially in the first 6 months to a year, dramatic changes in structure take place in the brain. And during the early development years, while kids are growing up especially, all sorts of interactions with the environment cause changes in brain structure and brain function. So it very well might be, and I'm saying might be here because the medicine doesn't really go this far in any way, that behavioral things that happen in the first couple of years of life could have serious positive or negative effects on the way the dopamine functions in the brain act in later childhood and even adult years.
Basically, it's saying that they're blaming the parents for the behavior of the children. I was listening to a long program on that today.
Yeah.
And it's the unstructured life when they're small that's causing the ADA, and children act out and they're more likely to be able to use marijuana.
You know, I had a student in a seminar several years back that did an interesting paper for me in which she looked at the use of all illegal drugs among teenagers and people in their early 20s, looking particularly at Ritalin using and ADHD and associated diagnosed students. And she found out that those people who had diagnoses of attention spectrum disorders, who received prescription stimulants, had the lowest rate of use of other illegal drugs. Those who did not have a diagnosis of ADHD, but who used Ritalin as a recreational or brain booster drug, had a relatively low rate of using other illegal drugs, and that those with the highest level of illegal drug use were those who had ADHD, who had not been diagnosed and who did not receive one of the adrenaline or amphetamine type stimulants under prescription to treat it. So that at least as far as those studies went, the surest way to get a kid to use illegal drugs was to find one who was ADHD and not let him have Ritalin. And we're going to take a break and see you in a few minutes.
Get back, zombie. A study by the Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse said that teens found it easier to buy marijuana than beer. Drug dealers don't ask for ID.
I need brains.
My friends used to make fun of me. They said that smoking weed made me no fun. I never wanted to go out and party and do the stuff that they were doing. Looking back, I'm kind of glad that I smoked pot. Otherwise, I'd be just like my friends.
Drunk driving accounts for almost 20,000 fatalities a year, and out of all of the drug-related deaths, marijuana has never accounted for a single one. Know the facts. Know the law. Normal.
Welcome back to Drugs, Crime, and Politics. I'm Buford Terrell here with Clayton Jones and our friend George Washington tonight. My book review this week is going to be a little different in that I'm going to my other great teaching love. In addition to controlled substances law, I spent almost as long teaching First Amendment law. And after all, it's the First Amendment that allows us to bring you television shows like this to talk about things that the members of the government may rather we not talk about. The First Amendment is short. It's only 45 words, but as far as I'm concerned, they're probably the most important words ever put into language. They're the core, I believe, of our whole system of government. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, Anthony Lewis, who is a longtime reporter and columnist for the New York Times, has written a biography of the First Amendment, Freedom for the Speech We Hate. Anthony, for I guess 20 years or so, has team taught a course in First Amendment law at the Graduate Journalism School of Columbia University with a constitutional law professor from that law school He's about as knowledgeable as anyone can be, yet he writes like a good newspaper columnist, which means he's fun to read. And this little short biography of the First Amendment is a great place to start looking at why you're able to raise hell about drug laws that you don't like.
Well, let's talk about the First Amendment.
Okay.
Out in California, we've had the 4 U.S. attorneys get together and say they're going to do a clampdown on the marijuana industry, the commercial side of the marijuana industry in California. But these prosecutors, federal prosecutors, are telling the newspaper that they can't take ads.
Well, now, that's kind of interesting. And to not get too complicated about it, they could file a criminal complaint against the newspaper for entering into a conspiracy to unlawfully sell marijuana. Yet to do that, they'd have to give the newspaper a jury trial. They would have to put the text of the ad itself into evidence, and that means that every member of the jury would know that we're talking about medical marijuana. The U.S. attorneys for 20 years now have refused to go to trial on anything in which a jury could possibly learn that marijuana was used for medicine or that the state considered it to be legal. So I don't see them filing a criminal complaint that they know the jury's going to turn them loose on. The second thing they could do would be to try to get an injunction against the newspaper to prohibit them from running ads for medical marijuana. Now, from the U.S. Attorney's standpoint, that has the virtue of that it would be tried to a federal judge with no jury. The problem is, enjoining a paper from publishing something in the future is what we call a prior restraint of speech or a previous restraint of speech. And everyone from William Blackstone, even before there was a United States, has agreed that the government has no right to put a previous restraint against publication on anyone. And the Supreme Court has held that consistently since the Near case in the 1930s. The third thing that they could try to do, if they brought either one of these kinds of actions, they could try to get a gag order to keep any other newspaper or TV station from covering the first trial. But gag orders don't work that way. They have been held to be unconstitutional, except for particularly limiting the participants of the current trial while that trial is going on, and only if necessary to prevent a disruption of those trial proceedings. So if they tried to sue one of these newspapers, every other newspaper and TV station in the state, if not the country, would be all over them. And guess what? The U.S. Attorney's going to lose in any one of those three circumstances.
Now, they're raising hell with all the dispensaries, the delivery services, the commercial grows.
Yeah.
Our friend Richard has gotten his eviction notice already.
Okay. What they're doing, they've been trying for 70 years now, 80 years almost, to stop people from growing and selling and using marijuana. They haven't been able to do it. So what they're trying to do now is put pressure on other people to isolate the growers so that they can't grow. They have gone after the banks, and this is really a big one, and suggested to them that they'd be guilty of money laundering or even conspiracy to violate the law or racketeering if they let a distributor have a bank account. They are going after landlords, telling them that if your property is used for this legal enterprise, we will forfeit your property under asset forfeiture. They're going after the newspapers, saying if you let these people advertise, we'll close you down. They went to one California sheriff and said, if you hold these seminars telling growers how to stay within the California law, you're conspiring to violate the federal law and we'll bust you. In other words, they're trying to go, they're telling the people growing, you have to pay taxes, but we won't let you take any deductions. What this is to me, as much as anything, is a confession of weakness and failure on the part of the U.S. attorneys out there. That they haven't been able to accomplish anything. So, in effect, they picked up a baseball bat, they've clenched their teeth, they've closed their eyes, and they've just started swinging that bat widely around in circles, hoping it'll connect with something.
Basically, they're saying that they've lost,
yeah.
that we have these 3,000 plant grows that we're finding,
yeah.
3 locations right here on the west side of Houston. But there weren't there that many of them 10 years ago.
Well, the thing is, if you go back and look at California, this would go back to the 1980s at least.
Okay.
When indoor growing and hydroponic growing first started coming on big time. The DEA at that time started threatening garden supply stores with conspiracy complaints if they sold grow lights or irrigation equipment or fertilizers.
That happened right here in Houston.
To marijuana growers. Yet, how's the garden supply guy going to know the marijuana grower from the orchid grower?
Right.
And you notice they didn't go anywhere with that particularly.
Texas Grower Supply they went to the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court, I believe it was, because Harris County wanted all their sales records.
Yeah.
And Rick wouldn't put them over.
Yeah. But, I think that's a case where they're not accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish, so they're just really striking out blindly in all directions. It's another example of it's a lost ball game. Congress just won't admit it yet. But on the other hand, it's also a ball game that we have to win in Congress, because there's no way that the states themselves can straighten this out.
We can't even get a bill into a committee lately. Lamar Smith out of San Antonio.
Please don't bring that name up, or I will say things that will get us pulled off of even a First Amendment-based TV station.
Yes, well, anyways.
In fact, I don't think any of my opinions about the current Congress can be expressed even in the most open First Amendment forum. It's pathetic.
It's pathetic. I agree with you, and I have been saying for quite a while, if they're in office, vote them out.
Yeah.
And if we could get a pretty good clean slate in one election cycle, I think it would be enough to tell the rest of them.
If you look at some of the jokers that pretend to be running for Congress or for president, there are unfortunately worse people out there than those in Congress now. But no, it has to come at that level. And while I'm saying that the U.S. Attorney's actions in California are to some extent a confession of failure, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to get hurt in the process. If you remember our last failed prohibition, they sent Chicago's greatest bootlegger, Al Capone, to prison, but the only thing they could get him on was income tax evasion. The same threat they're using in California now. We need to take another break. We'll be back in a few minutes.
The whole idea of a drug-free America and zero tolerance really doesn't make much sense, does it? So it does make sense, however, to find ways to reduce the harms associated with drugs. And that's what I want to talk about.
To start thinking about whether it is really laws that make the difference on whether people use drugs or not.
Al Capone didn't shoot people because he was intoxicated.
Right, exactly.
Those people are not fighting over drugs, they're fighting over money.
Drug laws have no basis in science. Drug laws are based on politics and money.
So there's this unholy symbiosis between, on the one hand, those who are selling illegal drugs, the drug lords, if you will, and on the other side, the drug warriors.
The war on drugs isn't working, and that, if anything, is just making what we call the drug problem a lot worse.
Have you no decency, protector? We're back with Drugs, Crime, and Politics. We were discussing some First Amendment issues as part of tonight's book review. Before we leave the First Amendment, there's one other thing that I want to mention, and that is, if you have looked anywhere in our country in the past month, you have seen thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of Americans exercising that right to peacefully assemble and to present grievances. And today I saw at least one poll result showing that a full 50% of the people approved of what the Occupy Wall Street people are doing, and that this was nearly 10% above the number of people who opposed what they were doing. But I would say if there's anyone demonstrating the true spirit of the First Amendment and really of American governance in particular, it's a large number of our federal citizens who are peacefully assembling in the streets and parks of not only our large cities, but even some smaller towns, simply to say, we don't like what's going on. You need to start listening to the people and get things straightened out. So my hat's off to the 99%ers.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay.
But they're not letting them present any grievances. The law enforcement's coming in the middle of the night, disrupting their camps, tearing it apart, hitting people with billy clubs.
I think we need to be proportional here, Clayton. There have been, and the biggest example probably so far has been Oakland, California.
Yes.
But if you look on the other hand, in New York, where it's been going on for over a month now, there have been some minor dust-ups with the police, but on the whole, things have been peaceful. If you look at what's gone on here in Houston, of course, they weren't able to get through the line of Jack Biddy troopers to present grievances to Senator Hutchinson's office, but the mayor's office and the Houston police have been
yes, they have.
Quite reasonable about working with them, closing down parks for other events that were already scheduled, finding ways to take care of sanitary problems. I would say that the tear gas in Oakland is really a pretty minor bit of what's going on. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hi, Buford, it's Dean.
Yes, Dean. How are you tonight?
I'm good, yeah, you guys have been talking about the Occupy Houston thing.
Yes.
And last weekend, Saturday, there was a gathering at Market Square Park to talk about I think it's 35th anniversary of criminal injustice and incarceration of a generation, if I remember the phrase.
Okay.
And good gathering. Ray Hill from KPFT spoke. There were some folks from Black Panther Party and even the Communist Party. Several others spoke.
Yeah.
And there was a march to various sites in downtown Houston. A lot of folks from the Occupy Houston gathering, joined in with that. And it was rather interesting to hear the truth about this drug war coming from so many different angles, so many different people. All of them summing it up quite well, I think. When it was over, I went over and talked to a couple of cops that were gathered nearby there and asked them what they thought of it all. And, of course, they mumbled and shook their heads and weren't going to talk. I spent about 5 minutes just asking them,
Yeah.
I told them I'm a member of a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, 35,000 current and former cops, and calling for an end to drug war. And I got them to, mumble, well, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, I told them Houston is the gulag filling station of this planet. We arrest people for marijuana when the legislature and the governor says we don't have to anymore. And they kind of, again, shook their heads and mumbled. But I guess the point is, there are so few people left, and amongst them would be, I guess, the drug czar, the head of the ONDCP, the head of the DEA, who stand up and proclaim that, marijuana is dangerous and addicting and leads to all kinds of horrible stuff, I suppose. But they're becoming just as rare as hen's teeth. And I think the courage of more people is necessary to swing this cat, to actually make a change. Because, the poll from a couple of weeks back said more than 50% of Americans are now for legalizing.
Okay, I was about to ask you that, Dean, because the next thing on my agenda tonight was to talk about that Gallup poll that said 50% of all Americans now say it should be made legal. That's up from 46% last year, and 46% say it should still remain illegal. And I know you get around and you talk to a whole lot more people than I do, but my sense has been that this particular Gallup poll has really been an eye-opener to a lot of people in the news business. What have you been hearing about it?
Well, no, I would agree. It has caught a lot of attention, of course, on Huffington Post and things like that, but it also caught a lot of attention in major papers around the country. It was mentioned in the Houston Chronicle. The fact of the matter is that there's even been other studies conducted. More than 50% of American adults have smoked marijuana.
Yeah.
Well, that 50% figure is not surprising when you get down to it.
Well, the government's own figure there is something over 40%. Now, they do say that over 15 million smoked within the past month.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is all subject to the fear factor, if you will, people willing to report on themselves committing an illegal crime.
Yeah.
So I often wonder if the number isn't significantly higher than what gets reported.
Well, now, supposedly, if you use cannabis, you cannot own a gun or buy one.
Right. Oh, and that situation out in California where the U.S. attorneys are trying to scare everybody, from the landlords of the dispensaries to the newspapers and the broadcasters carrying ads and on down the line, trying to put the fear of God in everybody, I guess. But the fact of the matter is that we have seen over the decades really of the marijuana war that the truth wins in the long run. I don't know if Washington or Oregon or California is actually going to be able to legalize it this year, but there are next year. But there are good intentions and a lot of efforts involved in trying to make it possible. And I would think hopefully one of them will, and we'll see what that does to this overall equation.
Yeah. A couple of other interesting things about the Gallup survey. In 1969, 12% favored legalization and 84% opposed it. So it's really a big switch. And the other interesting thing is that in those aged 18 to 29, over 62% approve legalization. So the young people have definitely switched over here.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that I honestly believe the possibility exists to make this change. It's like, well, there was a show on The Simpsons once about they were going to legalize weed, and then everybody forgot to vote.
Yeah.
And I just hope that the naysayers, and there are some within the marijuana movement, who always quibble about, it restricts us here, or it does this or that, or limits something or another. And there will be those growers, of course, who don't want it legalized, and they'll be working on their friends to vote against it.
Yeah. So
the chances are good that soon some state will legalize it, and when they do, I think it's going to just pull the plug on the government drain. It's not going to hold up if one state legalizes.
Well, I was thinking earlier tonight that just in the past few years, Massachusetts has removed all criminal penalties, leaving just a small civil fine on possession. California removed criminal penalties and just left a small civil fine on possession starting this year. New York has getting tough on their cops to keep them from arresting people for the civil violation of possessing. And if you start adding up the number of people, those that reside in California, New York, and Massachusetts, that's a pretty substantial percentage of the United States.
Oh, it is. And if we could get the district attorneys and the sheriff of Texas to make use of that bill, it was called House Bill 2391.
Yeah,
that says you no longer have to arrest, you no longer have to jail anybody for less than 4 ounces of weed. And I think it's only the district attorney in Travis County that has taken advantage of that.
Yeah, the problem is that the opposition there, at least from what I have heard, and this right now is really more in gossip, comes in Harris County from the county court at law judges who right now refuse to grant personal recognizance bonds on any misdemeanor cases. And the rumors around the courthouse say that's because the largest campaign contributors to their elections are the bail bondsmen.
Oh, no, this is so true. It is so true. I don't have the stats in front of me, but a rough estimation of the numbers, I think 17,000 arrests in Travis County, and something like 12,000 of them were granted PR bonds.
Yeah.
Here in Houston, Harris County, and I guesstimate it was a number like 20,000 arrests, and 153 PR bonds were granted.
As I understand it, there's actually a local law in the county criminal courts at law against granting personal recognizance bonds. And when I was a baby lawyer 40 years ago, even in a conservative place like Lubbock, anyone with a nonviolent misdemeanor charge automatically got personal recognizance if they had a permanent address in the county, if they had a job or were enrolled in school, if they had some member of their family living in the county, and if they had no other outstanding charges against them or any violent criminal record.
In Lubbock?
In Lubbock.
Wow. You think that holds true today?
Gosh, no. Because they got tough on crime just like everyone else.
Yeah, yeah.
But we didn't have any great crime wave. It didn't cause problems to public safety.
Niece Parker, I heard her talking last Thursday about this subject, people staying in jail longer pre-trial than they would have served if
they were convicted.
If they were convicted.
And here in Houston, at least, one of the real problems is that if someone is arrested and cannot make bail and has to stay in jail pre-trial, they're going to lose their job, which means they're probably also going to lose their apartment and their health insurance. And that's going to happen to them even if they're found not guilty at trial or the charges are dismissed.
Well, sure. They're probably going to lose their car and maybe their girlfriend, and who knows? I mean, the list is kind of limitless.
Yeah.
Well, just like Texas is the #1 forfeiture state. We don't do forfeitures through our own state anymore. We do them through the Department of Justice so that the Drug Task Force or that police department gets a percentage of what they forfeit. It was intentionally intended to help the public schools. That's where that money was supposed to go to. But they beat it by going through the Justice Department.
Right, and therefore it's kind of like laundering the money for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of like the banks do for the drug cartel.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out, a week from today, I'm going to be out in Los Angeles. There's a international drug conference going to be held out there, kind of put together by the Drug Policy Alliance and SSDP and a bunch of others. And there's going to be a great list of speakers out there. Governor, or former Governor Gary Johnson amongst them, and former President of Brazil too as well.
Well, while you're out there, bring some good material back to us. And be sure and say hello to that Clayton Jones character who's supposed to be there.
Clay, you going too?
Yes, I'm starting to drive out tomorrow.
Well, okay. You be safe, buddy.
Oh, always.
Okay.
I will. And this coming Sunday on my radio shows, I wanted to point out I'm going to have Irv Rosenfeld. He's one of the 4 people left alive
in the compassionate use.
I think it's every 28 days. The DEA approves, the FDA inspects it, and they send him 300 marijuana cigarettes every 28 days.
Yes.
The marijuana that the government says there's no medical use for, but they provide for these people.
Yeah.
For some 20-plus years now.
Man, I need the government to supply me my weed.
Well, they closed that program down.
Yes.
And
well, it was during George Bush the first tenure.
And
there
was
were
a lawsuit
that were contracting AIDS and wanted to use the marijuana to help with appetite stimulation.
Yeah,
Got to be too many, and they shut it down.
Basically, in the resulting lawsuit, the testimony came out that the White House wanted to shut it down because they didn't want the word getting out on the street that their nice Republican conservative administration was passing out marijuana to a bunch of sick queers.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see where that would resonate. We got to shut it down. But, yeah, the truth be told, I mean, you know, Irv is a very successful stockbroker.
Yes.
He's probably a millionaire as far as I know. He certainly has a yacht and sails and races and all that. Has a relatively productive and active life.
Yeah.
And it's thanks to marijuana.
Yeah. At one time, there were well over a dozen of these. And, you know, it makes me wonder. Ed's still around and active. He's been receiving this marijuana from the government for over 30 years now. What does this say about the fact that marijuana is so deadly and kills people?
Well, it tells us the government's lying.
Okay.
We've known that. Even the government knows they're lying.
Yeah.
I think at this point they can't back down from their stance taken for fear of, well, their hypocrisy being seen for just what it is, and perhaps they won't get elected again.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dean, and we'll be looking for you on the radio.
Well, thank y'all so much, and be sure to check out my show this coming Sunday, 6:30 Central here in Houston on KPFT 90.1 FM.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
And there were a couple of other things I wanted to bring up if we've still got enough time. The one is they conducted a large raid on a marijuana grow operation up in Liberty County this week. Several thousand plants.
3,600, I think it was.
Something like that. But the funny thing is that since that raid was announced, the police have had trouble with sightseers coming around the place. Some of them even telling the police that they were looking around in hopes that maybe a few plants got overlooked. But a raided marijuana farm has become a tourist attraction in Liberty County.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're busting big grows.
Yeah.
There was a grow up in Sam Houston Park that was busted about a month ago.
Yeah.
It was over 1,000 plants.
And that indoor operation out in Fort Bend County a couple of weeks ago was massive.
I think it was the end of last week. They had 3 grows that they hit out the same day.
Yeah.
One was over here on Tanner Road up by Clay.
Yeah.
And I was watching the news report, and it looked to me like they had an 8-foot trailer, 5 foot wide, and that thing was half full of transformers.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a machine shop.
Yeah.
They're being very successful at enforcing marijuana laws now that they catch these 1,000 plants.
Well, you know, if we take the old rule of thumb that they could catch maybe 5%, gives you an indication of how big the operations really are. The other thing I wanted to mention is Florida, in their last legislature, passed a law requiring anyone who received public assistance in the form of right to public assisted housing, relief payments, health care, several other things. Anyone receiving benefits from the state had to take a drug test. And they got the first batch of those administered, got the results back, and they found that a whopping 2% of the aid recipients in Florida flunked their drug test. That the rate among the state as a whole was something over 6%. So these no-good bums using welfare money to buy drugs in Florida just don't seem to be there. But today, a federal judge in Florida ruled that the Florida Test the Poor statute is unconstitutional. It's an unreasonable search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment because there was no reason to believe that the people tested were using drugs. So right now, that Florida make the poor pee in the cup statute is unconstitutional law. We haven't heard yet if the state's going to appeal. I assume they will.
The state is supposed to pay for the testing kit because the recipients had to pay for their own test kit.
Yeah.
And if they
pass, they got the state refunded the money.
And I think out of 100 people, the state ended up saving like $6,500 out of those 100 people because of the drug tests.
You mean they had to pay that much back to them? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They came out ahead of.
Yeah, it was something like $30 or $35 a test.
Yes.
And everyone who passed the test, the state had to reimburse them that money.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that also raises the question that if you're so broke you're having to get assistance money from the state, where do you come up with $35 to buy a drug test kit?
True.
So,
it seems like, to me, that the people that have a lot to say in our governments, that have a few dollars, they just don't want to put it out. They think that the poor are there just trying to clean their pockets out.
It's the old welfare Cadillac Queen nonsense we've had thrown at us forever and ever. And, you know, it just doesn't happen that way. Yeah, there are probably a handful of people across the country that have figured out ways to abuse the system. But the ones that do are more like those people in Houston that just got caught ripping the poor people and the federal government off for several millions of dollars with faked up ambulance claims under Medicare and Medicaid. We're about to run out of time. Go by and look at the Occupy Houston crowd and chat with some of them. Remember that on the 21st of November, we will change our day and time to Monday at 8 o'clock and join Clayton with his explorations of the West Coast. We look forward to hearing what he has to say when he gets back. And in the meantime, make sure your elected representatives know how you feel. Write to them often and state what you think. Good evening. We'll see you. God, ran a little fast. I'm not sure I can talk.
Here's your pen.
Oh, okay, thank you. We had a lot to say. I was hoping we'd get a few more phone calls tonight.
We didn't get any tonight.
A couple of prank calls. She decided not to.
Well,